Well, just a few days ago, famed astrophysicist Stephen Hawking was giving a lecture to a smallish group of people. And in that lecture, he basically said that by pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords, President Trump has essentially doomed the planet to what he described as 250-degree temperatures, the Earth turning into something like the surface of Venus, basically the end of civilization. And when Stephen Hawking said it, it turned out that several people in the room started to cry. Probably the end is very near, perhaps as soon as Thursday. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your members only right angle on the idea of authoritarianism and mixing science and politics. So, guys, I did a climate change video not too long ago, and I said, well, of course the climate's been changing. Their CO2 levels are now at about 400. Guys like Hawking are saying if we get to 450, it's going to turn to Venus, 250 degrees. Stephen, Venus is actually closer to 800 degrees. And so people panic, but 80 million years ago, it wasn't 450 parts per million. It was 1,000 parts per million. 500 million years ago, it was 7,000 parts per million, and the Earth didn't turn into a Venus. So, Steve, let's start with you. Do you think Stephen Hawking knows this and is decided that there's a higher calling, and that's why he's scaring the daylights out of people? Or do you think it's possible that his knowledge is so deep he's just out of his league?
How dare you question anyone trying to save the world, Bill?
That's right.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Their intentions are good. They mean well. They're trying to save us all and the planet. What caught me, though, was the people in the audience crying over this. This country has a long history. Every once in a while, some religious huckster comes along and says, "I know what day the world will end," and he always manages to attract just enough gullible but well-meaning believers to his sort of little doomsday faith. And then, doomsday rolls around and the Earth doesn't end, and the well-meaning believers kind of, I guess we got suckered by this guy, and they wander home a little wiser, maybe a little sadder, but certainly a little wiser. And what we have here is we've got these progressives who sneer at believing Christians, whether or not they're gullible or whatever. Gullibility is one of those universal human flaws that we all suffer from sometimes. But these progressives have been given doomsday after doomsday for the last 40 or 50 years. The planet's going to freeze. The planet's going to fry. Snowfalls are a thing of the past. And none of the doomsday predictions come true. But there they are every single time crying when they're told that doomsday is approaching again. So as it turns out, our progressive friends who sneer at believing Christians are far more gullible and far less capable of learning than those good believing Christians are. Go figure.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah.
Big ozone hole, Y2K, peak oil, going to run out of metals and resources.
Oil, yeah.
Yeah, food, population, all of this stuff, constantly preaching. The projection on the left's so amazing, Scotty. They always accuse us of being, afraid and fear mongers, and yet it seems to be these guys. So let me ask you this, Scott. Let's just assume that Stephen Hawking does in fact know that Venus is 800 degrees, and he does in fact know that the Earth is not going to turn into a cinder. He does in fact know that it's been far hotter and CO2 levels have been something like 14, 15 times greater than they are forecast to be. Wow. So why would a man like that make a statement like that? Why would Stephen Hawking probably make a case, the smartest guy alive? Why would he make a statement like that, do you think?
Well, first of all, I remember my terror when I heard we had reached peak Pop-Tart. That was probably the worst day of my life. Secondly, I can understand why people in the audience might have been crying when they heard the surface temperature of the Earth was going to rise to 250 degrees, because initially they probably thought Hillary Clinton will never be president. But if they thought about it for a little bit, they should have actually rejoiced, because it means no second term for Donald Trump. Hooray. So as the planet heats up like that. I actually don't think that Stephen Hawking knew what he was talking about. I think that Stephen Hawking had bought into this a narrative on the left that basically he's assuming that what he reads about in the news is the same as sort of the scientific analysis that he might put into his subject area expertise. You know, now there are a lot of things I don't know about quantum physics. So if I ever come on this show and start expressing my opinion about quantum physics or string theory, unless I'm talking about flying a kite, you should not listen to me. And I think it's the same way when you
I don't labor under that restriction.
That's right. And there are a lot of other good reasons to not listen to me in any subject, really. But I think that you know, to recount an old story and disguise the names, you know, I once had a scientist ask me what I thought of the theory of evolution, and it turns out that I've actually done a lot of reading from neo-Darwinians like Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Dawkins and a bunch of others. And so all I really said was, I didn't give a definitive answer. I just said, well, it depends on whose theory of evolution you believe in. Is it the one that says that Earth has changed little by little over vast spans of time? Or is it the one that says, well, really, the Earth can't possibly be that old, so it must have had some sort of great leaps forward in a sense? And those are kind of at odds with each other, but it depends on which one you believe. At which point the scientist said to me, well, you know, I've never really made much of a study of evolution. And as it turns out, he was expert in his field of study, but not in every field of study. So there's no such thing as a scientist, meaning a blanket guy who is a thinker of great thoughts about every subject possible. In fact, typically in science, they're more narrowly focused than even your average, you know, online pundit.
Can't be that bad, certainly. I would just close by saying this, folks. It's an interesting aspect of most mammalian structures, of virtually all mammalian species and humans and primates in particular, have a reference for authority. We have to cooperate. We're a strange species, humans. We eat everything, first of all. There's nothing in the world that we don't eat, so we're omnivorous. But we're also what people have called social solitaries. Part of our lives are set up as lives alone, solitary creatures, and other parts of it are social. But there is an enormous pull to listening to the advice of a person who's an acknowledged expert. And there's two problems with that. First of all, as Scott pointed out, the expert in one area does not necessarily become an expert in the other one, right? I mean, people would say Albert Einstein, there was a meme going around with a picture of Albert Einstein on a chalkboard, and below it said, you cannot simultaneously have peace and prepare for war, something like that. Albert Einstein. And the leftists go, see, Albert Einstein said that. He was the smartest guy in the world. What makes you think Albert Einstein has any idea at all about politics? What makes you think he's got the slightest idea? We don't turn to Albert Einstein for styling tips. We don't turn to Albert Einstein for dating advice. We don't turn to him for anything. As with Stephen Hawking, in order to be a cosmologist on the cutting edge, you have to be quite a bit batty, actually. You have to be just a little bit nuts. Einstein used to walk around his neighborhood and knock on his own door and ask if the professor was home, and when he was told he wasn't, he would walk away. This is what happens when you live out there. Parenthetically, the state of Israel offered the first presidency to Albert Einstein, who declined. And if he had accepted, the state of Israel would have lasted probably 3.5 weeks. Instead, it went to David Ben-Gurion, who, while not able to determine what happens when you turn on your headlights if your car is moving at the speed of light, was in fact able to determine that he was surrounded by enemies and knew what to do about it, and was a politician and a general. So I think that's basically the lesson here. You don't have to believe an expert, because if you're an expert in one region, doesn't make you an expert in another. And I learned from debate in high school that no matter what point you want to make, death penalty deters crime, doesn't, so on, you can find a stack of experts on one side, a stack of experts on the other, which brings us back to that second thing I was talking about, and that is our willingness to be sort of lulled into complacency by authority. It's easier to not think than it is to think. But none of this stuff is impenetrable in terms of this large scale. Simple research will get you right to the place where we talked about earlier. And so, Stephen, I would just close by saying this, because I know you're a huge fan of the show, and progressives as well. You use science and scientists because you believe that the credibility of science will raise politics up to science. Yeah. But all it does is drag science down to the muddy level of politics. Your peanut butter and my chocolate should stay separate on this one. Let scientists talk about science, let politicians deal with politics, and then science gets to maintain its snowy white robe of integrity. which has been sullied quite a bit lately. Thanks very much for your membership, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to do our members-only show. We're very, very grateful for the support you've given us and continue to give us. And on behalf of Steve and Scott, I'm Bill Whittle, and we will see you next week.